Welcome, and thank you all for joining us today. I am so proud to welcome you to the launch of the Building Holistic Security, Addressing Security Risks of Women Peacebuilders Through Partnerships report. This report was created through the Women Peacemakers program hosted here at the Kroc Institute for Peace and Justice at the University of San Diego's Kroc School of Peace Studies. We will get to hear from our 2020-2021 Women Peacemaker Fellows today, Nasreen Barwari, Muna Lukhwan, Ambassador Liberata Mulmula, and Slava Sheikh Hassan. It has been such an honor to work with them and get to know them through this process. The report that we're sharing today focuses on security risks to women peacebuilders and the ways that international partner organizations and funders can help prevent and mitigate those risks. This issue is foundational to moving peacebuilding work forward. We know that women peacebuilders experience threats at the personal and community levels, but also through partnerships at the institutional level. Women peacebuilders know best how they can be supported, and there is a need to prioritize their safety in program design and implementation. The fellows here today conducted this research during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, working across long distances over email and messaging apps to collect data and create the findings we will discuss today. Their work and commitment have been extraordinary. This report is drawn directly from the lived realities of women peacebuilders and their partners, and it analyzes the risks that many women peacebuilders experience and provide guidelines for international partners to reshape how they work with women peacebuilders and how they can expand access to funding and networks, which can be critical tools for supporting women peacebuilders' safety. I'd like to thank the research team that led this study: Sandra Malone, Neslihan Osgunesh, Eva Dalak, and Natalia Gojkovic. I'd also like to thank the partners from international organizations around the world that supported and guided this work. It's my pleasure to welcome one of those partners, Helena Gronberg, to give opening remarks. Helena is the program director of the Better Peace Initiative at the International Civil Society Action Network, ICANN, where she leads ICANN's work on gender-responsive and inclusive peacemaking. Thank you, Helena. We are so grateful for your support as a partner on this work. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Brianna, and thank you to the Women Peacemakers program for hosting this launch. The report has been a long time coming, as you said, and it was really exciting to finally read it over this past weekend. And it is, of course, as relevant as ever, and so much resonates with what we hear from our partners in the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, WASL, which is a network of women peacebuilding organizations and individuals across the globe that we at ICANN spearhead. And I actually should mention that myself and other colleagues who I think are on here listening in came to this meeting directly from one of our bi-weekly check-ins that we have with our partners, where once again, several partners shared experiences of recent attacks on themselves and their colleagues, including in Cyprus, like Liberia, Libya, and other places. So this again speaks to the timeliness of this report. And thank you also to the research team and the four peacebuilders, of course, Muna, Slava, Nasreen, and Liberata, who drew lessons from their own lived experiences to create the guidelines and the recommendations that are outlined in the report for how partners like ICANN can better support women peacebuilders and their safety. So, as Brianna mentioned, we started this way back, I should say, in February 2021, about a year into COVID. And we know, and this is also mentioned in the report, that COVID exacerbated the risks that women peacebuilders and others face. We saw violence against women peacebuilders, human rights defenders, and women's leaders increase. And in some places, we also saw states use the pandemic as a pretext for restricting rights and closing civic space. So given the pandemic, much of our collaboration between the peacebuilders, the research team, and the international partners was done online. And what the Women Peacemakers program did, and this is also one of the recommendations in the report actually, was to provide a safe space for learning, for discussion, and for what at times were quite difficult conversations around what true equitable partnership means and what we can do to advance those and ensure the safety of the peacebuilders we support and create solidarity, which is also very important. And as an international partner, it was a huge privilege to enter the space and have these conversations conversation at that time when we were all isolated and in lockdown. So thank you so much for that. As I mentioned, the report findings resonates with what we hear and also highlight in ICANN's protection framework. The women peace builders that we work with challenge existing power structures, systems of governance, control of resources, and notions of security. And due to the nature of the work they do, they face very targeted threats to their physical, emotional, political, economic, and spiritual health and safety. And the threats are highly gendered and often use women peace builders' identity, roles, and social norms against them. But women peace builders also build bridges, right? They have a tendency to talk to all parties on all sides of a conflict and build trust. And it's this trust that also allows them to then negotiate things like humanitarian access, bring actors to the peace table, challenge extremist ideologies, and provide PPE to communities like many did during the COVID pandemic. But it's this engagement with kind of the all sides that also puts them at risk. They are more likely to be attacked, including by members of their own group, if that trust is ever questioned. So given these multifaceted risks, we as international partners have to work with women peace builders to prevent and mitigate the risks so they can continue to do this very, very critical work. And to end, I'd like to highlight two themes that stick out to me in the recommendations in the report. And these are flexibility and trust. And I've already mentioned trust quite a bit. Flexibility encompasses a lot, right? Not the least funding. So we really need to put our money where our mouth is and provide flexible, multi-year and core funding to allow women peace builders to be in charge of their own programming and agenda, including leading on the risk identification and mitigation. This also would allow them to, through this flexible funding, respond to real-time changes in conflict and security dynamics. And this also includes being allowed to temporarily cease operations if conditions change and the peace builders no longer feel safe. The other thing that I'd like to emphasize is the need to step away from siloing the work and recognizing that many peace builders work on the nexus of development, peace building, and humanitarian response. And this is also a way for them to mitigate risk and access the communities. And Muna and others can speak to this firsthand. We hear more and more about the triple nexus, and it's almost like it has become this very sexy thing to talk about. But this rhetoric absolutely has to translate into practice and the support that we give to those actually doing the nexus work that is so risky. At ICANN, through the Innovative Peace Fund that we run, a small multi-donor fund launched in 2015, we're always trying to change our own practices and be as flexible as we can, advocate with our donors to allow us to be flexible, because again, we are beholden, sadly, to our donors, as well as trying to have those discussions with partners so that they can pivot the funding when needed, including when they face risk to the security and well-being. And this leads me to the question of trust. At ICANN, we talk about the importance of investing in trust, right? We have to trust, as was mentioned already by Brianna, that the women peace builders know their context the best. We have to invest in and trust those who put themselves at risk every day, who are on the front lines responding to the needs of the communities. And this also includes partnering and funding and supporting groups that are marginalized, smaller, or harder to reach, and sometimes not even register. So we have to really find ways to support widely and broadly. And with that, I want to thank you and congratulate the team for this report. It's fantastic, and I urge everybody to read it and look forward to hearing from the researchers and the panelists, the speakers, the peace builders themselves. Thank you, Brianna.
Thank you so much, Helena. We appreciate your support throughout the work and your partnership with us today. It's now my pleasure to shift us to a panel featuring our 4 Women Peacemaker Fellows, as well as the lead researcher who created this report, Sandra Malone. They'll speak exactly to what Helena was speaking about, discussing that cross-sectoral complex work that peace builders are doing and the need for flexibility and trust with partners and donors. It's my pleasure to introduce Sandra today. She has worked in peacebuilding for 30 years. She is the chair of Search for Common Ground Europe, the founder and CEO of Zancora Consulting, a co-founder of El du Sahel, and was the research team leader for this 2020 through 2021 Women Peacemakers cohort. She'll introduce the panel members and be running our conversation today. Welcome, Sandra, and welcome to our 4 Peacemakers.
Thank you so much, Brianna, and thank you so much, Helena, for your concise and thoughtful remarks. It was a real pleasure to work with you. And as everybody in the audience and report readers will observe, the privilege of working with our 4 women peacemakers in this cohort, whom I'll introduce to you now, was immense. We will have 2 main panels. I'll introduce you to the 2 first women peacemakers, then pose them questions, and then we will have a second panel where I will introduce you to the other 2 women peacemakers and have more questions after that. First and foremost, let me introduce you to Muna Lukman, who is the founder and chairperson of Food for Humanity and the co-founder of the Women Solidarity Network. She frequently briefs the United Nations Security Council and members of Congress, has mediated between armed groups, and has focused on climate change and water diplomacy and security. She is a member of the United Nations Envoy's Amman consultation and a member of the Gulf Cooperation Council Yemeni talks. Slava Sheikh Hassan is a civil society activist, humanitarian worker, researcher, and a political science master student. She has worked for INGOs and NGOs for the last 12 years for internally displaced persons inside Syria and for refugees in Turkey, Iraq, and Jordan, both directly and indirectly. Muna, Slava, welcome. Please, would you be kind enough to tell us about some of the threats which women peacebuilders in Yemen and Syria are experiencing and how partners can better support them? Muna, you first, Slava afterwards, please. Go ahead.
Thank you greatly. I'm really honored to be here. Finally, it's being published, and that's great. It's actually quite timely also right now. But I wanted first of all to thank all of you, the research team, Kroc Institute, and our generous partners for really supporting us. And I'm really, really grateful for Helena to be here, especially that I am also a member of the Women Leadership WASL for Security with ICAN. And let me just say that the threats of war are not the only threats in Yemen. You can imagine how a country that has had economic collapse, civil war, and proxy war, many proxy wars actually, not even one, and a new Kabul becoming in some of the cities controlled by the armed forces of the Houthi rebels. So now we have major attacks directly to the Yemeni women. So that's the protection side of it, and the actual attacks on the civilians, women, men, and young children. But then you have systematic attacks and threats against the women. And over the past nearly 2 years now, since we actually started this research, we have seen that the indicators that were already in the research that we had mentioned are now becoming a reality. And that shows that how, when we don't listen to the peacemakers, when we don't listen to the locals on the ground, things actually become even worse. And that's actually what's happening now. Right now, we have a restriction of movement on women. And we have, so they're not allowed to travel on their own. They're not allowed to travel to get their salaries. That's what's left of their salaries, because there aren't any salaries anymore. But when there are, they have to travel from one city to the other, because each area is called by another arm or another territory area by a de facto government on the ground. And so all of this is threatening their movement, threatening their livelihoods, threatening their health, and of course, causing more malnutrition and more gender-based violence on that we are seeing. I think that one of the major threats right now is the threats that we are seeing by on social media, the defamation campaigns that have led to kidnapping, led to killing and targeting of women activists and just local women who are just in anywhere. And so I think these are the major threats right now. Another threat is also the economic threats that the women are facing, because they are also unable to have any decent livelihoods. They're unable to work, they're unable to move around. So these are the major threats. And I think that one of the major recommendations that we had in this research, and which I can really emphasize on right now, is support more the local organizations on the ground, because they are reachable, accessible to these women who are not able to open their own projects, but these organizations are supporting them with livelihoods, and more livelihoods and stability for these women provides more protection. So we need protection on many levels. So we need, first of all, the war to stop, and that's inevitable, and this is the major issue. And then another issue is that we need to also support the women who are working either in the diaspora or inside Yemen, because both of them are strategizing to end the war and to create more spaces for women and youth. And we're not seeing any support going to them, which means that there is more inefficiency in all the, either in the UN peace processes, which are not inclusive, or in the work on the ground to stabilize the economy and stabilize the security. So I will end there, and then we can continue more discussions.
Muna, thank you so much. Slava, before you go, can I just tell the crowd gathered here that you are able to write if you have questions along the way in the chat, and I will come back and process the questions with our 4 women peacemakers after the 2 panels, okay? Thank you. Slava, please.
Sandra, just before Slava, I just wanted to add something before it goes. I also wanted to add that for the first time in Yemen, we have hundreds of women who are in Houthi-controlled prisons, and this is devastating. And we are really trying to urge the international community to support us in our advocacy to release these women unconditionally, because they are using them to bargain the release of other detainees or other criminals. And this is really unacceptable. This has never happened before in Yemen. Women were, although we had all the cultural norms, they were a red line. And right now, they are being kidnapped and being killed and in prisons as we speak. So thank you.
Thank you, Muna. Slava, over to you.
Hello, Sandra. Hello, everyone. I'm very happy to see all of you again. And finally, we are launching our report. So I only have 5 minutes. I will make sure to answer your question. For women in Syria, unfortunately, they are still facing the violence of all kinds, harassment, exclusion, economic deprivation, arrest, and exile. And that's where everywhere inside Syria, with the difference of the de facto forces, the dominance of armed groups or armed actors, including Syria regime forces, and the absence of laws protecting women, and the lack of accountability mechanisms put women at risk. There are no official structures, whether government institutions or agencies, that ensure the protection of women peacebuilders inside Syria. The focus mostly in the humanitarian sector are relief, protection, food, and also health, rather than peace building with a longer term lens. These are the risks are already mentioned in the report, but also I want to mention more about the current risks women are facing. The violence is still continuing or threatening women's life, especially after welcoming Bashar al-Assad in many countries, like he did nothing in the last 12 years. And women are losing their faith and trust in the international community, and that includes the INGOs. After the deadly earthquake in northwest of Syria and south of Turkey, women started to face new risks. Hundreds of them in northwest of Syria had to leave their houses and to live in camps, which lacks for the basic needs for any human being. Also, women in neighboring countries are facing threats of what is called voluntary return, especially in Lebanon and Turkey. And believe me, that's not a voluntary return at all. I have lots of stories. Lots of stories about people who are being taken back to Syria, and they are facing the threat of death and detention every single day. Refugees are in Lebanon and Turkey facing a major racist campaign, and every day there are reports of cases of abuse against children, men, and women in all sectors of life. Women in northeast of Syria are facing kidnapping, arrest, death, and fear as a result of fighting between the SDF military factions and also the clans. And also there's still hundreds of thousands of detainees, women and men. We don't know anything about them. Actually, unfortunately, I can go on speaking about the Syrians, what Syrians and also Syrian women are facing, but also I wanna come up with some solutions. So we need the community to take a community-driven approach to problem solving. Like implementations challenges do not mean that support should be discontinued. Also, we need to form women-led community committees so that women can become change makers and peace builders. Support the programs that build the national identity of all conflict parties and promote tolerance without exclusion or discrimination. We need to assist women peace builders at risk rather than seeking temporary solutions. We create a clear and specific rescue strategy and have a dedicated office or email for emergencies communication. We need to provide protection, including security, financial, and legal support for women peace builders under threat and help them develop safety plans. We need to provide operational grants for women-led peace building projects with direct technical assistance, support loans, co-financing, and with forms with financial assistance. Also, focusing on the early recovery process, because we cannot still, after more than 12 years, work on responding to an emergency response. For INGOs who are working in neighboring countries of Syria, it has to be a priority to address the racism issue with the local partners. And also for northwest of Syria, the random dissemination of assistance, especially after the earthquake, has affected only badly on people in need. People are in need for more sustainable projects, more than food baskets or temporary aid. Women in all Syria need to be in decision-making positions so they would protect their whole community. And also, before I finish, I want to say, for the sake of women, men, youth, and the future generation of Syria, Bashar al-Assad and his regime must leave the position. And also Syria must have a transitional justice to save the rights of all Syrians. So that's like in general, or like sum up of what it is already mentioned in the report, and also what I wanted to add. And also, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Slava, thank you so much. Before we pass to our second panel, I really want to thank Muna and Slava for the richness of your hands-on knowledge about the very real and more than unfortunate realities and threats which women peace builders in Yemen and in Syria are facing, have faced, and are facing today, and some of your recommendations on how we can better support them. Thank you very much. Let me introduce you, please, to Dr. Nesrine Barwari, and to Ambassador Liberata Mula Mula. Nisreen Barawi is a professor of public policies, development planning, and good governance with 30 years of experience in the humanitarian, nonprofit, public, and academic sectors, promoting peace building, conflict management, resilience, and women's empowerment. She was the Minister of Municipalities and Public Works in Iraq's first post-Saddam regime government, and served before that as a Minister of Reconstruction and Development at the Kurdistan Regional Government. She is the recipient of numerous international awards. Ambassador Liberata Mula Mula, a Women Peacemakers Fellow from Tanzania, is an advocate of the Women, Peace and Security agenda and a peace activist. She is a former Minister of Foreign Affairs and currently a Member of Parliament of the Tanzania National Assembly. Nisreen, your research emphasizes that international presence itself can be a form of protection. And Liberata, your research focuses on building more participatory approaches to partnerships. What recommendations do you each have for donors and international partners to build partnerships which enhance the safety of women peacebuilders? Nisreen, you please go first.
Thank you all for this amazing event, which of course it's a product of a work that we were very emotionally attached to, considering that we were working on these issues for years, and to have the platform to reflect and to share the experience and to be able within this platform together with the team of researchers and of course the support that we got from Kroc Institute to really make recommendations that hopefully will make an impact in future planning, policy making, project design. It's a really privilege and honor, and I thank you all for making me part of this effort. I come from Iraq, which is a country of unfortunately has been known for the last 30 years for its wars, and other than that, it's a beautiful country full of culture, full of ethnic diversity, which should have been a source of celebration and enrichment and progress, and the lack of good governance and good leadership and political consensus that has led the country to go through so many wars. And unfortunately, I have to report that the instability continues. When we started to work on this report, it was in 2020, right? 3 years after defeating ISIS, which controlled a third of the country and generated millions of internally displaced people, Yazidis, Christian, but also Sunni Arab, Sunni Muslim. And women has been used in this latest conflict as a weapon of war by targeting, enslaving women, using them, to defame families. So really the work of women to support those victims, but also to try to establish a culture of coexistence, peace, trauma management after going through ISIS trauma, but even the continuous trauma that Iraqi people as a community, but specifically women, youth, children, has been going through in Iraq, has been really been challenged. And in the forefront of this effort has been very courageous women who comes from diverse group that represent the diversity of Iraq society. I'm a Sunni Muslim Kurd, and through my humanitarian NGO have been working and children to deal with the trauma that they've gone through in a displacement camps. And then we have Yazidi women activists supporting Christian and Sunni Muslim women and children. So this is like really the environment of women, which just by the diversity of it create a lot of risk and threats. Definitely that diversity need to be one of the main issue that need to be recognized by international partner, that any like like really the view, like when you look at the issue of security and risk, it's diverse based on the country, based on the region, based on the conflict. And that is very important, that we will not have a one solution that fits all. So recognition of the diversity of the risks that women go through is very important. And to treat this issue, it's very important to involve, and this is my second recommendation, involve peace and in the planning, in the design of assistance, of support, so that we really have a good understanding, you know, wasting money, designing programs that doesn't builders. And here I also want to mention what is written and recognize the report of most of the context. They are not called peace builders. For the protection of their work and activity, a lot of risk, because we're talking about countries that are not stable. They are still under conflict. So if I go and work and try to make it change as a peace builder, I'm already attracting a lot of negative attention and risk to my own life. So we call them activists in Iraq and Kurdistan for environment for the work. So the importance is really to involve those activists in the planning, so that they can, of course, build the capacity, but also design exactly what fits the situation that they are in. It's very important, as the conflict prolong without solution and other conflict emerge in other parts of the country, the other result will be fading of the funding. Funding dries out, international organizations leave, and that leaves our activists really at a huge risky situation, because they have put their life in the line, addressed very sensitive issues, tried to work on the ground, has been visible. So really the third recommendation is to try to maintain funding and even to increase it to include training or ways of protecting the peace builder, the activists themselves. The funding has to embody within itself an allocation on how to protect your own self and your own identity. And we're working with a country, and again, I have to always refer to Iraq. Unfortunately, I mean, this is one thing I need to report now as an update. We continue to be living in a very unstable political condition in Iraq. There has been 2-3 government failure and establishment of emergency government. There has been a shadow government supported by militia groups that are outside the security system. And these are the militia group that has been targeting activists. So if people demonstrate, and people who recall, who demonstrate, complain about security, about public services, basic need, and then you hear about disappearance of activists, people who participated. And so there has an increase of targeting of women who has been active in the digital platform. So kidnapping, killing, all of these risks really call for immediate attention and sustained attention. And that's where the partnership can provide protection for those activists. Because the international community development seeds, they act as monitors you know? So it's very important to maintain that presence in one way or another. Second, it's important to build the capacity for activists, peace builder, on how to protect themselves. And of course, definitely third, push and press, or maybe the recommendation that I will end with is how to pressure governments, national government, how to build their legal system so that it's not politicized, and there will be a legal platform for peace builder to complain or to go to as a protection in addition to the international partnership. I mean, I would like to end here, but I will be open to questions. There are a lot to talk about. Of course, the report has done beautiful work in capturing our insight and the insight of the people we interviewed. And hopefully it will contribute to a better, peaceful environment for the many courageous women who are putting their life to build peace in the world.
From your mouth to God's ear, Nasreen, inshallah. Absolutely. Thank you for the richness of your recommendations to the international community and the influence that we might be able to have on governments and civil society to protect women. Thank you. Liberata, are you able to come on and enrich us too, please? Thank you.
Yes, I hope I'm unmuted. Let me say good evening. Of course, for Tanzania, it's good evening. For others, maybe it's morning. I'm so pleased to join you in the launch of our long-awaited report. Let me start by saying what diplomats know best: to thank and thank and thank again the Kroc Institute, my cohorts, women peacemakers, but also the facilitators, Sandra, and the whole team, Brianna, for making this event to happen today. I know you have asked me questions about partnership, but before I get into the partnership and the recommendations, I used to teach in Washington, George Washington, and one of my colleagues said, never take things for granted. Tanzania. And I know people will be asking why Tanzania is in this cohort group with my colleagues from Iraq, Syria, Yemen. Where does the Tanzania fit in? Because Tanzania is considered as the most peaceful country in Africa and has been even ranked, I think, 63rd by the Global Peace Index out of 163 countries. But I'm here because of the role that Tanzania has played in promoting peace, security, almost all over the world. But mostly Tanzania, though it's peaceful, is located in the most volatile region. For those who are aware of what's going on in the Democratic Republic of Congo, what we experienced in Rwanda during genocide in Burundi, and so Tanzania has always played a key role, and that also shaped my career trajectory. Since I've been in the diplomatic service, I've been involved in many conflicts. But as I'm also speaking, I have my twin sister, and we're identical. As I'm speaking, she's in Syria. She's with the UN team in Syria, in Damascus. She was in Iraq. She was in Afghanistan. So in all, trying to contribute to peace processes. But then also in the context of Tanzania, I want just to put it clearly that peace does not necessarily mean absence of war. We also have our localized conflicts where women have been involved in trying to find peaceful solutions. We have conflicts that arise from the land use, from our resources, especially around the mining, around the water. So you have, this country is also endowed with so much of these resources. And that's nowadays, even water has become a source of conflict with the climate change. So, but then our research was focused on the role of the local women builders, although they don't know even themselves that they are local women builders, but they are involved on everyday basis, from the family level to the community level, trying to play a role and in resolving some of these conflicts. We have conflicts between the pastoralists and farmers over the land use, over the water use. So these women have been doing a lot, but unfortunately, they have not been recognized as such. They are not honored. But then they always, of course, they're always lacking funding. And that's where we go to partners to seek their support, how they can support these women. And we have had, of course, good partners, the donors, so-called donors, but we call them development partners from various countries, the Nordic countries, the US, and they are everywhere. So what we realized in our interview, and this is Sandra, I'm coming to back to your question, there was a gap between the local women, peace builders, and the partners in the sense of the so-called partnership. It was unbalanced. Unbalanced because the donors, they have funds, and therefore they determine the priorities that align with their own objectives. The women I invited, say in workshops, in events, but then they will take their opinions. But when they are providing funding, they provide it through the big organizations, the UN Women, the international NGOs. And then sometimes these funds, they take those that trickle very little to the grassroots. So this is where we made a recommendation that to have impact, real impact, of course, the partnership brings impact in the sense, of course, they provide resources, equipment, and so forth. But to have impact at the local level, they need, and this is, they should involve these local women peace builders in designing, as Nasrin said, in the programs, but also the activities. But also, we recommended that instead of giving this money to these big organizations, and which sometimes is lost in covering overhead costs, that they should give funding direct to the women. They are well organized. They have their own organizations, associations, but then sometimes they are seen as lacking the capacity and knowledge to manage this big funding. So that is our recommendation. But two, to build the capacity, because if they have no capacity, then this funding should go to build their capacity to enable these women to be able to even prepare the proposals for funding and managing the funds. But three, we are saying what the donors, of course, the intentions are good, but these women at the grassroots level, they have more knowledge. They are the ears and eyes on the ground. So the knowledge they have, the donors, the partners should be able to tap in that knowledge and come up with a program that would be have impact and sustainable. And of course, finally, that we, the donors, and we, local women peace builders, we need to learn from each other, from the best practices that have worked and which have not worked. So these are my few of the recommendations, but of course we have detailed recommendations in our report. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Liberata, it's we who thank you very much for your recommendations. We have several questions from the audience. What I propose to do now is to have, in the same order where you met, Muna, Slava, Nisreen, Liberata, I'm going to ask the three key questions that we've summarized from the audience. And you can pick and choose what you'd like to touch on, okay? So let's listen to the three questions. We have 13 minutes left. If we just take 1 to 2 minutes each of you four to answer whatever you want from those three questions, we'll be in very good shape. And I really appreciate how you've kept time. Thank you so much. All right, the first question is, what can local governments or the private sector do to support women peace builders work locally, local governments or private sector locally, if you'd like to comment on that. The second bulk of questions relates to this. How can partners and peace builders build equitable partnerships so that peace builders do not become overly reliant on those funders? And last but not least, any key recommendation that any of you has that you have not spoken to in this session, which you would like to bring to the public. A recommendation that's in the report already, but hasn't been mentioned, or something that has happened since you have finished the research and since you finished writing this report. Okay? So Muna, we're going to start with you. Tackle what you'd like for a minute or two. Okay?
I just want to say that I think the questions are really important, and it shows how much there is awareness. The problem isn't with the awareness, it's with taking action. I think we have lots of reports, and while we were doing actually this research, we've met with lots of other peace builders who have also, really stated so much of this, and there have been researchers before us. The issue is that we're really not taking action, we're really not listening. And like I said at the beginning, it's an issue of efficiency and impact and preventing violence. So from that point, I think what the report is trying to tackle, we had a good angle at the beginning, and I think that the most important part was that we're trying to think of how to mitigate the risks that are facing these women, and at the same time showing the importance of the work that these women are doing. So to do that, I think it's really important to think about partnerships, of course, in many different ways, in an inclusive way. So private sector, for instance, is crucial to this. But of course, right now, they're also, I think, maybe reluctant because of all the defamation campaigns against anybody who's speaking about peace. The problem is those who are violating and spoiling peace and creating violence around the world are being given the VIP treatment, while the people who are trying on the local level to bring in some sort of bridging between the communities that are fighting and trying to combat the hate speech, they're the ones who are being attacked. And so I think it's really important, first of all, to go back to the build the trust, focus on institutionalizing movements and networks that are really community-based. Another point would be that to build upon some of the momentum, some of the really good examples that we had during COVID-19 especially. For instance, for us in Yemen, we had a really good initiative between the private sector, civil society, the international groups, and the UN, and it was to combat COVID-19 and bring in some of the tools and equipment that were needed at that time. And this was led by the HSA group. That was amazing because they really, and it was effective, and they were able to reach and access through the local organizations many of the governors and cities. I think it's really important for us to revisit and restructure some of our, either the peace processes, the UN pooling funds, and try to really reevaluate how we're doing this. We're not criticizing their work. We're not saying that they can't do the work or we can't do the work on our own. We need to work collaboratively. But when we say that, what can the governments do? Most of the governments that we're working with don't want us to do the work that we're doing, because we are bringing those boys back from the battlefields. We are trying to prevent more cycles of violence, and we are calling out the violators and creating advocacy at the UN security level to stop these wars. Of course, the governments that we're working with don't want to work with us, but we do need to bridge the differences and mitigate these differences and risks. So I know Sandra is already going to
No, we love listening to you, Muna, but thank you for sticking to that. Great. Slava, over to you, please.
Thank you, Sandra. This is very important questions. Actually, for the first question, unfortunately, Syria is now divided. So we don't have a local, let's say, community or authorities which we can rely on because it is so much divided, you know, according to the de facto forces. And also answering for the second question, that's why I mentioned in the beginning that we need to have more sustainable projects. Like all my fellows also said, we need to have women in the designing of these projects and also to focus on the early recovery to build the infrastructure of the country. Then the women and the community can rely on themselves. What I want to recommend at the end, actually, Syria now is going back to the first days of the revolution of 2011. Now, while we are speaking, and in nowadays, women in Sweden, in Syria, are also shouting, as we did in the 2011, that الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام. The people want to overthrow the regime. The international community doesn't want to hear us. This is what we've been asking for more than 12 years, and that's what Syrians need. And I really mentioned that before, and I really need to mention that again. There were no peaceful Syria with the Assad regime in power. So this is also my answer for the question. I'm sorry if I didn't answer it very particular, but really the situation speaks for itself. So thank you.
Thank you, Slava. We hear the appeal strongly, and let's hope many of us work towards making things right. Let us go to Nisreen now. Nisreen.
I would actually answer combining the three questions because I really find them very connected. I mean, my recommendation will connect the equitable partnership and will also pave the way for a role for local government and private sector. For many of the countries that are facing continuous conflict, I think one of the reasons, and I reflect on my experience from Iraq and Kurdish background, it's lack of government of expressing that there is a peace issue. That's one of the problems, that everybody will talk about representation, role, quota system, but all of them avoid using that we have a peace issue, because they know if they commit that that is the problem, then the set of solution will be completely different than what they are now proposing and using as a way of empowering themselves and using this gap of power to build those different powers, and then taking advantage of the piece of cake that are available by international communities, and until new crises emerge, and then we are forgotten, then we are back to what we were. So first of all, my recommendation is that we really have to force governments to acknowledge that there is a peace issue, and we need to embed peace building for the government and connect peace building to development. Because most government, when they are trying to rebuild after conflict, they immediately jump to the development. They think of big projects. They hold elections when environment in the ground is not safe for people to go and vote or make a free selection. So it's really important to connect peace building to development. And when that is taken as a vision by the government, then it can be translated into, of course, policies and then sets of regulations that involve establishing the legal system that provide protection. But also then, once the plan is clear and agreed by all partners, and then the role of the local government will be very clear to enforce those policies, maintain like the legal system and the environment for people to play a role. And I think the private sector will be encouraged to work in those environments when they know that there is a set of plan or a rules where they can contribute, because private sector will never get involved in destabilized situation or places where there are still risk. Just like what's happened in Kurdistan, where many NGOs are leaving, not because of destabilization, but because they think, okay, ISIS is gone, then we are gone. But they are still sleeping. There are sleeping cells that they are causing troubles from place to place. And so I believe that we need to work on government and force them to connect peace building to development, and that will create the role for government, local government and private sector, but also make sure that there is equal partnership for all to play an effective and important role.
Thank you, Nisreen, very much. Liberata, your closing recommendations or comments, and then I pass the floor to Brianna for closing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sandra. I fully agree with what Nasrin has said, and that specifically, of course, when we talk of partnership, what I wanted to submit here, that with partnership, one, as I said, it requires both partners to have a mutual partnership based on shared purpose, vision, commitment, ownership, but also linked to development. This is why when in Tanzania, we avoid using donors, we use development partners in the context of development. And if I might allow me just to share with you that Tanzania has launched recently a development process to create a women, peace and security national action plan, which is led, of course, by the government, because I see one of the questions that we depend so much on Western governments, but then where are the governments? I mean, of course, the government is on the lead. It's not that we are on our own. That's why we look for the partners. So by launching this development-based process to ensure or to enhance sustainable peace and security and development in the country, it has to be all inclusive, that no one should be left behind. You know, in the past, of course, also through various forums at the UN, things are decided at that high level. Now, of course, the emphasis is that all should be included, especially, as I said, and once again, that to involve the women at the grassroots to have impact and sustainable development. And this is what we keep on emphasizing with our development partners, that you will spend a lot of money, but you won't see impact if those who are directly concerned are not involved in implementation. So it will be project after project and fragmented projects with very little impact. And what we also seek is to have trust, transparency, and all-inclusive approach. I thank you.
Thank you. Hear, hear. Brianna, I'm passing the floor on to you for closing, and all the participants, thank you. Read the report, circulate it. It's full of richness we couldn't bring in just 1 hour to you. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Thank you, Sandra, for leading our discussion, and thank you to our 4 fellows for sharing your time with us and your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it and have been honored to get to know you through this process. And thank you to Helena as well for being our partner and being with us today. I hope that you'll use this QR code, and as Sandra mentioned, please go read the report. It's full of the topics we discussed in this event and other topics as well, including things like cybersecurity or the COVID-19 pandemic and how they relate to security risks. We learned from this research and from these amazing leaders here how important collective care and building networks are as mechanisms to protect and support women peace builders. And so I want to thank you all for being here as a community that cares about the safety of women peace leaders. And to echo Muna, the importance isn't about raising awareness, it's action. And so I hope that from here we can work together to foster more holistic security for women peace builders. We know that creating more supportive and effective partnerships allows them to advance their difficult and often dangerous work to end cycles of violence and build more equitable communities. Thank you all so much for being here with us.